Air refueling operations are a core competency of mobility airmen, enabling worldwide rapid global mobility. Air refueling was designed, developed, and perfected on two continents, America and Britain. In the United States, early attempts at passing fuel from a tanker to an airborne receiver were rudimentary at best. In 1923, several refueling attempts set an endurance record of 37 hours with 16 air refuelings. Early air refueling attempts were made using a hose, usually a surplus fire hose, passed through a hole in the fuselage floor of the tanker to the receiver via a hole cut in the top of its fuselage and manually inserted in onboard internal tank. In 1929, the most famous attempt at air refueling occurred over the sky of Southern California, as an Army Air Corps Fokker C-2 called the Question Mark made 43 air refuelings from two Douglas C-1 tankers. Again, the refueling apparatus was a hose passed through a hole in the floor of the tanker and grabbed by a member of the receiver crew through a hole in the top of the receiver fuselage, and then fed into a funnel placed in one of two 150-gallon tanks installed in the cargo compartment. The Question Mark was able to remain airborne for 150 hours and 40 minutes, nearly 7 days. 3 members of the crew of the Question Mark have been inducted into the Airlift Tanker Association Hall of Fame. General Carl Spaatz, Mission Commander, inducted in 2002. General Ira Aker, pilot in 1993, and Master Sergeant Roy Ho, airborne mechanic in 2001.
In Britain, aviation pioneer Sir Alan Cobham believed the value of air refueling was to extend the range of commercial aircraft flights. Cobham was born in Britain in 1894, 9 years before the Wright brothers' first powered flight. He trained as a pilot during World War I and continued flying following the war. Cobham participated in several flying operations, from barnstorming to air races. While those activities were adventurous, none turned out to be profitable. In 1925, he flew Sir Sefton Brenker, Great Britain's Director of Civil Aviation, to the Middle East, India and Burma to investigate possible air terminal sites. That year he also undertook a similar survey between London and Cape Town, South Africa. A year later he flew a survey between England and Melbourne, Australia, and then returned, landing on the River Thames in front of a crowd of over 1 million who had gathered near Parliament. Following his return from Australia, Alan Cobham was knighted by King George V. Sir Alan's long-distance flights had required the laying of stores and fuel in many out-of-the-way places. He knew that fewer takeoffs and landings required to reach a destination would increase safety, range, and payload. Air refueling appeared to be the answer. Thus, in 1934, he formed Flight Refueling Limited, FRL, to develop air refueling equipment for both commercial and military operations. By 1938, FRL had perfected the loop hose system, frequently referred to as the dangle and grab. The tanker and the receiver aircraft would trail steel cables with grapnels on the ends. While the receiver flew in a straight line, the tanker would cross behind, allowing the grapnels to become entangled. The receiver would then reel in the cable from the tanker with the refueling hose attached. A member of the crew would attach the hose to the receiver fuel system, and the tanker would reposition above the receiver for gravity fuel transfer. FRL perfected the fittings necessary for the fuel transfer to go directly into the aircraft's fuel system, rather than a funnel on top of a temporary tank. This rudimentary system failed to gain favour in the commercial aviation industry, but it was used for a short time in 1939 by Imperial Airways for non-stop transatlantic mail flights between Great Britain and the United States.
World War II interrupted refueling development activities as neither the Royal Air Force nor the U.S. Army Air Corps saw value in refueling combat aircraft. However, in the latter years of the war, the U.S. Army Air Forces continued to study and test the viability of in-flight refueling. By 1947, the newly formed U.S. Air Force used the wartime studies and testing data to add air refueling to the Air Force future operational capabilities. In 1948, the fledgling U.S. Air Force started installing FRL's looped hose air refueling equipment in their KB-29s. In 1949, 8 KB-29M tankers, 4 primary and 4 spares, enabled a B-50A bomber, the Lucky Lady II, to circumnavigate the world 23,452 miles non-stop in 94 hours. While the looped hose was effective, it was very cumbersome to use. The U.S. Air Force asked Flight Refueling Limited to develop a more flexible automatic system capable of refueling not only bombers, but single-seat fighters as well. Flight Refueling Limited developed and demonstrated to the U.S. Air Force what we know today as the probe and drogue refueling system. The Royal Air Force used the new refueling system to allow a Lancaster tanker to refuel a Meteor jet, setting a world endurance record of 12 hours and 3 minutes for a jet-powered aircraft. The Korean War saw the first combat use of the probe and drogue refueling system. In May 1952, 12 USAF F-84 fighters were refueled by KB-29T tankers as they deployed from the United States mainland to Korea nonstop. Range extension is not limited to fighters. Air Rescue Service, a mobility mission for several decades, saw the helicopter as a perfect platform to rescue people in areas difficult to reach. The United States Marines had developed a KC-130 tanker to refuel their jet fighters using Sir Allen's probe and drogue refueling system. After testing, the Air Force accepted the C-130 tanker for refueling helicopter operations in both combat rescue and special operations, redesignating the tanker as the HC-130. The probe and drogue refueling system worked well for fighter aircraft and helicopters. However, General Curtis LeMay, Commander, Strategic Air Command, chose the Boeing-developed boom system for U.S. Air Force bomber and fighter aircraft because of its capability to deliver higher fuel transfer rates. The U.S. Navy and Marines found the probe and drogue system to be more efficient to use for carrier-based aircraft. Combat rescue and special operations forces also preferred the probe and drogue system for air refueling helicopters. Air refueling came of age during the Vietnam War, the first tanker war, with U.S. Air Force KC-135 tankers providing fuel to U.S. Air Force fighters via boom refueling, and HC-130 tankers providing fuel to combat rescue helicopters via Sir Allen's probe and drogue system. Tankers, having proven their worth, are now an integral part of the mobility mission and other U.S. Air Force core competencies. As the Air Force has evolved, combining and consolidating forces, tankers continue to be an enabling force for peacetime and combat operations. Joint operations with the Navy and Marine aircraft are possible by adding a drogue to the refueling boom of the KC-135 tanker. The KC-10 tanker was developed with both a boom and a drogue capability to support joint operations. Special Operations HC-130 tankers have been replaced by MC-130 tankers, continuing to use the drogue refueling system to support helicopter operations. From Vietnam to Desert Storm, Iraqi freedom to enduring freedom, to the current operations in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, no current military air operation is undertaken without tanker support. Today, using either the British probe and drogue method invented by Sir Alan Cobham's company or the American boom system introduced by Boeing, the ability of air refueling is a vital link in any modern air combat operation.
Sir Alan Cobham was truly an aviation pioneer who changed the future application of air power by perfecting aerial refueling concepts and techniques. As the US Air Force takes delivery of the KC-46A tanker, it is noteworthy to recognize that the centerline drogue system and the wing air refueling pods on the KC-46 Pegasus are provided by Flight Refueling Limited, today known as Cobham plc, named in honor of Sir Alan.
Sir Alan Cobham, a British aviation pioneer whose development of the probe and drogue refueling system revolutionized the mobility mission by providing range extension. Worldwide operations today routinely conduct air refueling operations using equipment based on his design. For his significant accomplishments in the furtherance of the air mobility mission, Sir Alan Cobham is inducted into the Airlift Tanker Association Hall of Fame for 2016.